Thanks again for joining us for this first ever Friday Night Forum in 2021. Can you believe it? 2021. Tonight, we're going to be engaging in Christian conversations surrounding the challenging issue of mental health. I'm your host, Pastor Mike Morgan. You know me, but we have some amazing panelists tonight. And I mean amazing. So let me just do some introductions. Dr. Mary Mannix is a clinical psychologist with a private practice in Encino. She received her BA in psychology from Wellesley College and her doctorate in clinical psychology from Rosemead School of Psychology at Biola University. Go Eagles, which specializes in the integration of Christianity and psychology. She completed her internship at the Child and Family Guidance Center in Northridge, and she has been in the field for over 20 years and a member of Bel Air Church for 5 years. She specializes in treating anxiety disorders, clinical depression, trauma, grief, life transitions, and works with both secular and Christian adult clients. So thank you, Mary, for joining us. We have Dr. Kelly Maxwell Haer, and she is the director of the Relationship IQ program at Boone Center for the Family at Pepperdine University, and is a licensed marriage and family therapist in California. She has a PhD in family therapy from St. Louis University, a master's degree in counseling from Covenant Theological Seminary, and a bachelor's degree from Furman University. She has a wealth of experience working with young adults in a variety of contexts, including counseling sessions, undergraduate and graduate classrooms, and the church community. So welcome, Dr. Kelly Haer. And finally, Dr. Cassandra Harewood is an adult, child, and adolescent psychiatrist with a private practice in West LA. She is a graduate of the University of Oklahoma Medical School and went on to complete her general adult psychiatry training at Duke University Medical Center and child and adolescent psychiatry specialty training at UCLA. For the past 22 years, Dr. Harewood has dedicated her career to serving vulnerable children and families from various backgrounds, and currently is a practicing and consulting psychiatrist for the LAUSD. She is a member of St. Augustine's by the Sea Episcopal Church and is an active member in the Santa Monica, Malibu Unified School District's African American Black Parent Advisory Committee. That's what I'm talking about. This is an amazing, did I not tell you that we have an amazing list of panelists here? So thank you. I am filled with gratitude and I welcome you here to tonight's Friday Night Forum. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Well, hopefully you did get your cup of favorite tea. I don't know if you're able to do that. I have mine and it's cozy, it's warm. And we're just gonna have a little living room conversation about a significant cultural crisis surrounding mental health. So before we jump in and go into the deep end around this topic, I just wanted to kind of get some background and a little bit, more familiar with your different roles, right? I see that you all have a number of different letters at the end of your name, and you're all doctors, but there's a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a marriage and family therapist, and what are the differences between that and I know of Stephen's ministers or other counselors? What does it look like from your perspective, your difference? What's your specific role?
Great, I could jump in. Go ahead, Kelly.
Okay, so my background is in family therapy. So family therapists specialize on kind of what I call the in-between people, what's happening, the relational dynamics between people, and take a look at how those dynamics also impact an individual's experience. So focus on family relationships.
Nice, thanks. Cassandra, you're gonna say?
So I can go next. I'm a psychiatrist. First, I'm a medical doctor. Okay. So I've done training with all specialties from delivering babies all the way to surgery, but I chose psychiatry as my area of specialty. And I did further additional training in adolescent and child psychiatry. So I'm a general psychiatrist being able to see adults, but my area of expertise and specialty is with children and family. So as a psychiatrist, my role primarily is diagnosing, to do diagnostic evaluations, and then determine what sort of treatments will be helpful to my patients depending on what the disorders are. Sometimes medication management is indicated and sometimes it isn't.
Mm.
That's a discussion and a collaboration that myself and the client or the patient has together, and we work together on it.
Beautiful, beautiful. And Mary?
I'm a clinical psychologist, and I think the difference is clinical psychology, we are trained in assessments, so we can conduct psychological evaluations in addition to therapy, which is different from master's level. Usually they don't, except for maybe school psychologists who do testings in school just in general. So we can do psychological assessments, and we have more years of training than, I guess, a master's level. Now, I know Bel Air has a Stevens ministry, lay counseling. They go through some classes and I think are prepared for just your everyday run-of-the-mill kind of issues. But I think if it's more clinical in nature or diagnostic or trauma or severe, that's when it's probably out of their wheelhouse, and you need to seek more of a professional. And I also get a lot of calls every once in a while that really is for a spiritual director. I'll refer them to. It's not psychological in nature. As I'm listening, I'm like, really, it's totally spiritual, this issue you want to work on. And I think meeting once a week with a spiritual director is actually what's going to benefit you the most. There's not anything I'm hearing that's emotional or psychological in nature. So a lot of Christians don't understand the difference. And also my clients who come to see me generally aren't looking for, some of them know the Bible better than I do. So they're not looking for necessarily verses, or they're looking for the psychological side, but if they're Christian, they say, I want a Christian because you have the same values. I know you're not a psychologist, and there are some in LA that look at Christianity as a negative and a defense, and or actually just aren't comfortable with anything spiritual. They're not trained in it. So any kind of spiritual issue, even if it isn't the forefront, they're just not comfortable with. So that's why usually my Christian clients are like, okay, I want to know that you have a faith. So even if I'm not talking about it, you know the lingo, you understand, and you're not going to take me away from my faith. You're going to help me along to hopefully strengthen my faith. So I would say that's the caveat. I do see secular clients. Some of my secular clients, they might know I go to church, but they don't care. They're not looking for the Christian part of me, even though I don't leave that at the door. God is with me, and he's the author of all healing. So hopefully if I get them more mentally healthy, that opens up their spiritual, or if they do, and usually they do if they stay in therapy long enough. I've had all secular kinds. Eventually they come to a spiritual question, so, and then I feel very comfortable of exploring that with them. So
that's great. Yeah, well, then that's it. That's what's beautiful about all three of you, is that we're working with someone who loves Jesus and who's really skilled and educated in your field. And so all three of you have different perspectives as you're coming towards mental health. You're addressing it from different angles, but all angles are important. And I think it's going to really enhance tonight's conversation. So I'm looking forward to it. Just speak from your perspective, and let's just jump into it. I just got to listen, pandemic, here we are. I mean, it's like a year. We're still on Zoom. Like, we didn't think that we'd be here a year ago, right? And so with this pandemic, what are you hearing? What are you seeing? What are the issues that people are facing that you're helping work through? Just let's start talking about it.
Lots of issues of isolation, loneliness, fear, uncertainty, not knowing when this is going to end,
Mhm.
wondering, will we ever go back to normal? What's that going to look like? Just a lot of uncertainty
Hmm.
and not being comfortable with it because we don't know exactly where we're going with this at this point.
Hmm.
Yeah, when I think about the impact of the pandemic, it's obviously represents so much change in our lives on so many levels, and that change people experience most often as stress, as difficulty, losses of income. There's grief around the loss of income, loss of seeing people like normal, just loss of daily routine and schedule that really impacts life and is difficult. One interesting thing that's come up with some of the folks that I work with is a struggle to validate what's difficult and hard about life. And, they might say, but I get to be home all day with my cat or my dog, or, I don't have to face the commute anymore, or my life's not, I still have my job, in other words, my situation's not as bad as somebody else's. And so I've seen a number of people struggle to self-validate what is hard in their situation and kind of give themselves a hard time for struggling with the things that are difficult or lost in their life, even if they're not as hard as the next person's. So I think there can be this challenge to actually name well and validate these real losses. Some people are experiencing them acutely and like, this is terrible and awful, I've lost my income, I've had to move out of my home or whatever the case is. And others, lives have been impacted, but in less headline type ways, but it's still difficult and there can be a struggle to validate those changes.
No, it's really important. Cassandra, I want to get back to your uncertainty comment in a second, but can we just sit with what Kelly is talking about right now? Because I think you're naming, you said loss, and you use the word loss on a number of different topics, and surrounding loss is grief. And I think that there's this real grief that we're experiencing, and it's hard to name it. And then, what do you do about it? Like, what are some of the processes of grief, and how have you seen that being played out in with those you're working with in society? What is it real that I could be grieving the loss of not just a loved one who might have passed away with COVID, but a loss of something else, and it's going to be to validate that loss. It's not this, but it is that. Is that still worthy of grief?
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. We're creatures of habit. We like routine. As I've mentioned, I'm a child psychiatrist as well. And children, we all know, love routine. That's actually how they learn, how they grow, how they develop mastery. But we as adults, the same, whether it's going to work every day, getting up, getting dressed, getting your kids ready for school, making a phone call every morning to your grandchild, whatever it is.
Going out to eat at the pizza parlor on Friday.
Exactly. Going to the beach, that's the thing you do, hanging out with your girlfriends, your bridge club, those sorts of things. And we've lost that now. And we were trying to still do things that kind of feel normal, but they're not really. We're just kind of fudging it, and kind of all that is really stressful. And even though we are able, to Kelly's point, even though we are able to do a lot of it, it just doesn't feel the same. And there's a part of us that feels guilty for even complaining, because we're doing great, for some, I caveat that, but there's so many people that have lost so much, that have actually lost family members to COVID or other illnesses during this time. We can't grieve in the same way that we used to. We're not able to, for some of my Jewish friends, sit Shiva with family members. Even as Christians, we have repasts and we get together, we gather. Gathering is not allowed anymore. So that's really, really, really challenging. So, I think sitting with the grief and acknowledging it is the first thing, not pretending as though it's not happening and just trying to move on. And doing these sorts of things, talking about it, talking about the things that are not comfortable, having courageous conversations about things that seem like, hey, is it just me? And once you start talking to people, you realize it's not just you. And then you just have a sense of community and connectivity just by opening up the dialogue about things that seem strange, or am I the only one that's feeling this way?
Yeah, I think, and you just helped us with that because you named it. You said, I would say that I'm feeling guilty at times of grieving something that I'm like, I know this isn't as big of a deal as what so-and-so is going through. And so I feel like, oh, I shouldn't feel this way, right? And then I feel like maybe I'm the only one, maybe I'm the only one who's impatient with the process, or, is having these feelings. But for you to name it and say, no, like, I think this is a common issue that we're all experiencing. It allows for me to go, oh yeah, good. I'm not alone in this. Not that you're also experiencing that, but good that I'm not alone in having this. This is a common human experience.
Correct.
A word to help folks validate, who are struggling to validate, the challenges that they've experienced that are maybe less than others, is to recognize, God created us as people who are made to experience perfect relationship with Him, with ourselves, with other people. We were made to be able to have a certain sense of control and efficacy in life. And we're experiencing the absence or the breakdown of those things. And so really, anytime life doesn't go perfectly, which is what we were made for, there's space for grief there, that there's loss there. And so it is good and right to grieve when things aren't the way that they were supposed to be. And so again, even if these things are small, it's not, what God intended. It's a consequence of sin and brokenness in the world, even, the seemingly small losses. And so if we can remember that we were really made for perfect everything, we can make sense of why these quote small things still matter to us.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's right to grieve them.
That's good. Mary, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I just echo. I think what they said, definitely I see a lot of anxiety, depression. I think whether you're in therapy or have a diagnosis or not, everyone's affected by the pandemic, and everyone has a mental health challenge from the pandemic. Whether it's, anxiety over getting the vaccine, or your loved ones, or being out of your routine, or not being able to go inside a building for church. I mean, it's a change on such a massive level, and kind of like God created us as relational beings, in person, touching, I do therapy over Zoom, but I can tell you it's not the same. And I've even discussed with clients how, losing that kind of in-person feeling is a huge loss. And I think not minimizing people's losses, I think is important, because those losses, whether they might seem small to them, it's probably in the big scheme of things big. And this has been going on. This is not like it's a couple weeks, or, we're going on 10, 11 months now. So it's, a pandemic is what they call a big T. We're all under a trauma in some sense. And, I think I think I've actually experienced with my clients, they've been angry at a lot of people who are in denial, not wearing masks, living life like nothing's different. So there's been a lot of also shaming for my clients if they social distance in a way, or had to tell a relative, no, I don't feel comfortable gathering on Christmas together. So a lot of them have been shamed or felt made to feel guilty because they're not, the grandparents can't see the grandchildren. So there's a whole host of, I would say, relational conflicts that, if your marriage was already having some cracks before the pandemic, I've definitely seen in my clients, like, there's nowhere to hide. A lot of my clients are facing things that they were being able to distract and avoid before, but now they can't avoid it. They really have to face the problems in their marriage, or the roommate problems, or the parent-child. They can't get away from it. So I've seen a lot of stress and working through that I've had to help people with then too.
Mm. Well, hopefully that's an opportunity. I'd hope that in the midst of that, if they are going to you, there's an opportunity there for healing and wholeness.
Yes. Yes.
Well,
It's
just to be able
actually
to-
kind of been a good thing, because a few of my clients have been forced to face something that we needed to face in their marriage, but they haven't done it. So I would say it's actually been a good thing in that respect.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Mary, you sent me an article recently, and it was from what was it? It was Christianity,
Psychology Today.
Psychology Today. And just to preface this, on your phone when you're looking through your photos, on my phone, I have it pops up like a year ago today. Like what happened to this
Right.
week a year ago today, right?
Right.
And I have a 3.5-year-old, and we've talked a little bit about him, but a year ago today, he looks so different.
Right.
And I see this picture of him a year ago today, and the first thought, I actually showed it to my wife, and the first thought she said was, she was like, "Oh yeah, that's right before all this went down." And I was like, "Oh, he looks so different." That's how long it's been, and then all the things that we see in the news, is it going to end? Like, we have this hope. And so let me just read this, from Psychology Today. The topic is intolerance of uncertainty, which I've never heard that phrase before, but I like it. And there is a lot of uncertainty in our world today. And so we hear about this vaccine rollout, our hope that the pandemic is actually like nearing its end, but there's no way to know for sure. And so in Psychology Today's article, it says, the title of the article is "How to Face Uncertainty at the End of the Pandemic." Doctors Sandra Lara and Michelle Newman write this. They say, the anticipated end of the COVID-19 pandemic may not be clear-cut. There's no big block letter headlines in all the newspapers, think like the war is over type of announcement. Instead, it will more likely be a prolonged, slow petering out with no clear ending date. Goes on to say, and if there is no clear-cut ending with no definitive knowledge on when and how it's safe to fully resume our lives, some of us may struggle with that too. That is, your ability to tolerate uncertainty may play a big role in how you cope with transitioning back into the world. A lack of clarity about what is the right thing to do could be very distressing to those of us who prefer things to be very cut and dried. Which I'm resonating with as I read that. I'm like, yep, I can feel that already. I know I'm down the list on when I can get that vaccine.
Right.
So am I feeling like, let's talk about this a little bit. Like maybe this is the first time you've heard of intolerance of uncertainty. Does it resonate with you? Help us understand it a little bit more. How does it differ with anxiety? What comes to mind for you?
Uncertainty. I've worked a lot with individuals struggling with singleness in a way that they would like to be married. And singleness is ridden with ambiguity. Uncertainty and ambiguity are very similar concepts. Having studied ambiguous loss in relation to singleness, I've parsed apart the definitions of those words. But all to say, uncertainty is really tough to deal with. As humans, we don't like it. We like to understand, predict, and have control. When we don't feel in control, we don't feel safe, and we don't like it. So you think of stories like, say, Joseph in the Bible, where he was in prison and he lived his life in that uncertainty. He didn't know what was going to happen. He didn't know that he would get out of jail. He didn't know he would end up being in second in command, be able to give food to his family, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's easy for us to read a story like Joseph's and be like, yeah, it all works out. But that's not how he lived his life. He actually lived his life in the daily uncertainty, just like we do. And I think it can be helpful for us to recognize that, people in the Bible, also Job is a good example, live their lives in the uncertainty, in the day by day, walking with God. And that's what we get to do also, is we get to walk with God in this uncertainty. And the uncertainty really functions as this amazing opportunity or crucible to have faith in God, ultimately, to trust Him as the one who does know all things when we don't know. So yeah, I think as people, like, we tend to hate uncertainty. We like to be in control. We like to feel safe. But again, if we can learn to shift and say, okay, uncertainty actually is an amazing opportunity for faith. It's an amazing opportunity for trust in God, versus fighting the uncertainty. If we can sit back and allow ourselves to accept it and to sit in it and say, we don't know, and we are never going to know, to be able to predict the future of what's going to happen at the end of the pandemic, et cetera, and let ourselves be tolerant of the uncertainty can be an amazing way to evidence faith and bring Him glory ultimately.
That's really interesting. I mean, to think through that perspective, like we do read Bible characters and we're like, oh yeah, that wasn't that great. Like it all worked out for them. Isn't that nice? But no, that they lived in this uncertainty every single day, just like us. And we get to walk with God. I think it kind of unveils this false sense of security, or this idea that we had certainty ever anyway. Like,
Right.
Yeah.
we don't know what tomorrow's going to bring anyway, but this kind of amplifies that, kind of like what Mary was talking about with marriages, like it's an opportunity, it elevates like an already existing fear that we have of the unknown. And now we have to actually deal with it, and deal with it, hopefully with God. What are some of your other thoughts as you hear that?
It really is a faith journey. I think Kelly laid it out so beautifully. As Christians, we purport that we have faith. Well, this is the ultimate faith in God right now. We didn't think it was going to look like this. We didn't know how things were going to play out. But, with faith does come responsibility too. So even though ultimately things are going to play out the way that they play out, there are some things that we can do. And I think being responsible with the things that we're able to do and the things that we are able to control, stay in that moment. I think it's really easy to get ahead of ourselves, worrying about things that we don't know and things that change on a regular basis. But the worry and the fear and the uncertainty is unknown because it's changing daily. You mentioned the vaccine rollout. That's a big one because quite literally daily it's been changing and very stressful. But it's also an opportunity to see how we as a society are dealing with certain things that we thought we had managed pretty well. Right now, the tier 1 system is for the healthcare providers, first responders, and people over 65. And to see how challenging and difficult it's been for our seniors to be able to get this vaccine, and with the internet and having to use things on the phone that may not be their wheelhouse. And if you don't happen to have a family member that's savvy to help you, we should not be in this position. So the hope is that we've learned from this and we can now use that information to improve on those sorts of things. So as Kelly mentioned, and Mary too, seeing this as an opportunity. It's a horrible opportunity, which we didn't have to get to here, but we have to find the silver linings and hold our politicians and ourselves accountable to really push for the things that we need to move past this so that we're not going through these things again.
So I hear intolerance of uncertainty and the similarity between uncertainty and ambiguity. I also think about anxiety, and I've heard a lot of people express how much anxiety that they're feeling and experiencing in this season. what's in your mind kind of, is there differences between anxiety and in intolerance of uncertainty and ambiguity? And how do you know if my anxiety is like run-of-the-mill anxiety, or how do you know when it's clinical? Can you help us with that a little bit?
Who wants to take it? I can jump in there.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, so there's circumstance, so if people told me during this period of time that at some point they weren't depressed, sad, or anxious, I'd be concerned because that's completely normal. It's completely being human to express those feelings and to feel those feelings. When those feelings begin to take over to the point that you're not able to take care of activities of daily living, taking care of yourself, your family, your pets, when you're thinking about things so much that it precludes other aspects of your life, then you have to wonder, is something else going on? We worry about appetite, about sleep, other health conditions. Are your blood pressure going up? One of the things we talked about, the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist, other psychologists and other mental health professionals definitely ask questions about physical health, but that's my primary role, is to first rule out medical, to make sure that there isn't any other medical thing that's going on. And we know that mental health issues actually exacerbate medical conditions. So it's really, really important to still find out about those things. So I think it pushes over to clinical when it begins to affect other areas of your life. It's really important that we collaborate with others. You may feel like it's all good, but your spouse or your friends or your siblings are like, no, something's wrong. So it's important to hear what other people say and just take it for value. You don't have to agree with it, but explore it. So yeah, it's kind of a fine line sometimes, but talk to other people to just figure out, do I need to be worried about this? Do I need to talk to someone else about this?
I found a really practical way to think about if depression, is clinical or not, or, to what extent you're depressed is, and I resonate with this personally, what I'm about to say. If you have a cry, do you feel better afterwards? When you're not, clinically depressed, you can cry and there's a sense that it's cleansing and you kind of feel better afterwards. And this is not exactly, but this is, kind of rule of thumb, versus if you cry and you don't really feel better and you stay there and you're crying all the time, then maybe you're depressed in the sense that your brain chemistry has kind of gotten off track a bit. And it's harder for you to have a sense of hope. Thinking about anxiety and depression, I find that this can be helpful conceptually just to appreciate, what's going on. So we know that when individuals are struggling with their sense of their identity, their sense of self, or their sense of safety, which when you think about the pandemic, many individuals' sense of safety has been impacted, or their identity, career loss, relational changes. When we have change or threats to our sense of safety or identity, we tend to respond in two very broad ways: fight or flight. In the way that there was a physical threat, we would fight the bear or we would flee from the bear. So we do this emotionally too. We fight or we flee. And the fight can look like anxiety, keying up to try to work harder, do more. And the flight can look like depression and withdrawing. So, as you think about yourself over this last year, you might ask yourself, do I tend more towards an anxious response? Do I tend more towards a depressed response? Am I trying to fight harder, or am I more prone to withdrawing? Sometimes our initial response can be to fight, and then we work so hard to try to fight and make things better that we give up and we go a different direction and we flee. So you can kind of use that as a way of kind of understanding yourself and what's going on. Again, anxiety and depression is just a very natural response to these types of stressors and pain.
That's so helpful. That's so helpful to hear that those are natural responses, that there's not a shame component of it or like a guilt component of it. It's just like, yeah, in this scenario, there's a good chance you're having one of those two reactions and be aware of it. Yeah.
And like Cassandra said, if you're not, you're probably in denial because, if you're not experiencing any anxiety, any sort of depression or insecurity or and that's more worrisome to people that literally are in denial and live in, like, I'm more concerned about that population.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Disconnected from what there is to feel.
Yes. At a very significant level if they can do it during a pandemic. And
Most definitely.
there are people out there that are that disconnected.
Mm-hmm. And at the same time, even as it's very natural to experience anxiety or depression in response to these stressors, we do have choice. There is a response, we do have ability to respond to these painful feelings, these threats to our identity or threats to our sense of safety. We can respond in healthy ways too.
Yeah, and let's explore some of those in a moment. But one person on the forum asked a question when we were talking about the vaccines. That brings up emotion. And so I think of the emotion kind of being like a service light on the dashboard of your soul. So like you don't just put something over that service light and just keep driving. Your engine's going to seize, right? You like go, oh, there's a problem there. What's going on underneath the hood? And this person said, with coping, how does someone cope with feelings of anger? And that's the feeling aspect, the feeling of anger due to being at the bottom of the list to get the vaccine and having no idea when it'll happen. There's a real sense of like, hey, this is great. I'm glad that the vaccines are being rolled out, but man, it's going to be another how many months before I even get to benefit from it. And I appreciate the honesty behind this question.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I
Absolutely.
think that's a totally normal reaction. And not only at the bottom of the list, most of my friends in other states are vaccinated. So then we're looking at why in California, my parents have been vaccinated in North Carolina. My sister's getting vaccinated in Michigan. They're already done already. So it's kind of like, okay, why am I at the bottom of the list and what's going on in California also? So I think there's a lot of anger. There's a lot of, which to me seems normal because, and on top of it, in my aunt in Lancaster County, where I grew up, that health department decided that
Pennsylvania, right?
in Pennsylvania, that they were not going to vaccinate because the rules were too complicated. So they weren't going to vaccinate. They were going to wait and not vaccinate at all. And my aunt is 70 years old, compromised, and she was irate and very upset. Because again, these are life and death decisions. But I think you have a lot of people at certain levels not looking at mental health or making these decisions. And I think that's where people are feeling a lot of frustration because some of it is not common sense or not clued into working with medical professionals and mental health of what makes the most sense, and how to distribute, how the tiers should work. I think the first stage is just validate the anger, that's legit. And a lot of people are feeling that they're not the only one.
Now, I think often we can feel angry when we feel the most powerless or we feel the most unsafe. That anger can feel good. It's a strong, powerful emotion. I say feel good. Feel good maybe as opposed to feeling fear, like we might prefer to feel anger versus fear or a lack of safety. And so to appreciate, it may be because you may feel angry because you're out of control or this, you're not able to have impact here. You're not able to change things how you'd want to. And that's hard.
Yeah, it's really hard.
And anger is an easy feeling to go to. As Kelly talked about fight or flight, anxiety is connected to that, but also the fight you got to rev yourself and be pretty angry to fight. So those are very natural and normal feelings that kind of come automatic. Some of the other feelings that don't come as automatically or people may push back is worry, fear, feeling scared. They may not necessarily tap into those. So I think it's important to talk about those as well and try to work through that. Definitely, as Mary said, acknowledging the anger because it's real and there's real reasons to be angry, but it may be tied to other feelings too, incompetency, lack of, feeling strong, feeling connected, just not knowing, like we've talked about before, where the future lies and that ambiguity.
Or I think there's a lot of guilt for the people who have been vaccinated over people they feel like, I think someone more vulnerable should have been vaccinated before me. I've had several friends say that as well. So it's a myriad, I think, of emotions. But it lies into that, again, uncertainty that is very hard to deal with. But luckily, as Christians, we know this isn't the first time God's seen a pandemic. He's been through pandemics and plagues, and ultimately he's in control. And I think that can help our ability to, I think as Christians, have an increase of tolerance of uncertainty. It's much more helpful for my Christian clients than my secular clients that they don't know if anyone's running the ship up there. So I see more anxiety in them and fear than what we have as a faith that, okay, God is somehow going to redeem this horrific, and in the history as Christians, we've always moved towards suffering. I mean, that's also, I think, this opportunity to, in this uncertainty, to have good and show God's love and have healing happen. So I think we're in a unique space and situation and time that God put us here.
We get to bank on the certainty in God. And going back to the anger, I was offered this one other kind of practical thought is to ask yourself, if you're angry, what are you afraid of? And actually write it out to say, I'm afraid X, Y, or Z person's going to die, or I'm going to get very sick and not be able to do X, Y, or Z, and to actually, get at the bottom of it and say, this is what I'm afraid of. And it may take a moment to think about it and give yourself that space. It may, what you're afraid of may not be immediately present to you.
Well, and you made an interesting jump there because I think you both are kind of, you're all touching on this, but Cassandra, you were saying, you have this anger and that's a validated feeling, but there might be something below the anger. There might be something else underneath that. And, Kelly, you said fear, like, what is it you're afraid of? And for many, like, I'm angry. I'm not afraid, I'm angry. It's like, well, you might be, yes, you're angry, but you also might be afraid, so how do we ask those next questions? Like, validate the feeling. Yes, I'm angry. That's a real feeling. I feel those feelings, but help me, like, what's the next question I need to ask myself after I feel angry? Then what do I do?
I'll be curious to hear Mary and Cassandra's, y'all's thoughts too, but what comes to mind is, what's this anger about? Maybe kind of that generic question of, where's the energy of this anger coming from? Kind of sit with that. Why do you care? Why does this matter? What you're angry about?
I agree. I would sit with the anger a little bit. And explore that, and then move on to, you did a great job, Mike, could there be anything else going on? And even use myself as an example. I'm afraid, yes, I'm a doctor, but I'm a human too. And I want to be here for my kids. I want to be here for my family. So I think just really aligning with those human emotions and those human feelings, and just keep going with them. One question leads to an answer, which then leads to another question, and we just keep going back and forth. So
writing it down or really speaking it out loud to another person. There's something that's powerful when we say things out loud.
Absolutely.
Versus just keeping our thoughts in our minds.
And my experience is most Christians don't are afraid to go to anger, really, because that's a no-no. Like, so most of mine, um, especially if it's at God, and usually I'll say, God can handle your anger. I mean, it's not, but I actually think most of my clients, that they're okay on the worry and the fear. They don't want to say that they're angry at God for this pandemic or their situation, or so I definitely stick with that. I don't dismiss it, even though it's probably related to hurt and fear. I also say that's just as valid, because I think in the Christian community, it's definitely not okay, um, to be angry, and that's not uh, godly, or there's something wrong with your faith if you're angry about the pandemic,
Well, you're
or angry that you're not getting the vaccine. And I see a lot of Christian shame because of the anger. And I think that's something that the church can do better about, just kind of, like you said, exploring it and normalizing and validating it versus trying to sweep it under the rug. It's why in the documentary with Fred Rogers, his whole thing on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, one of the reasons he developed it was he grew up in a Christian household where you couldn't be angry at all. And he was bullied, called Fat Freddy as a kid. And I think, Mr. Rogers, he did a good job of allowing kids to express any emotion and validating that was okay. But I think Christians and anger definitely have a, complicated history where, at least in my Christian clients, it's usually repressed a lot. So
I really appreciate
I try to explore it and have it come to the surface. So, and make sure that it's exploring all that's going on. It's usually with other things, but definitely, I think, especially women, I don't find Christian women want to say they're angry, or if they do, they feel very guilty about it. So anyway, that's my experience. But so I kind of agree with everyone to explore it and look at what else is going on and underneath, but also saying it's okay. You're not a bad Christian if you're angry.
I'm so
Because
glad
that's the message that a lot of my clients have
100%.
gotten.
Totally, 100%. I mean, and you're right. We have, as Christians, we have this weird relationship with anger. We have a weird relationship with sorrow. Like there's certain feelings that have been labeled. These are appropriate feelings for Christians to have. And then there's other feelings that are like not appropriate, as if emotion is a moral issue.
Right.
Like, is there amoral? It's not a moral issue. Jesus, in the Garden of Gethsemane, is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point that he feel like he could die. Like
Yes.
that, I don't
Yes.
know. If you felt
Sounds
that
like
way,
suicidality to me.
if you felt that question, if you felt that kind of depth of sorrow as a Christian now, would you feel like, what, maybe it's just because I'm not trusting God enough, or whatever. You put some sort of guilt on yourself. I shouldn't be feeling the way I'm feeling. And yet we have a savior who's been modeling for us. Look, hey, when my friend died, like I didn't just weep. I didn't just shed like a little tear. I yelped like a wild animal. I mean, it was just this immense amount of emotion that came out of Jesus. I'm like, if he can do that, like that gives me some freedom to be able to feel my feelings, And,
absolutely.
So there's a term that names kind of what we're talking about sometimes that the church is guilty of saying, if you just had more faith or you just believed or whatever, this term spiritual bypassing, where we just want to like say some platitude and quickly move past the emotion or the challenge or the issue that's there. And that was a term out of the 1980s and 90s. I think it was John Wellwood. But I think it'd be helpful to name, like, this is something the church is guilty of doing, of saying, just believe in Jesus, just have hope. It's all going to be better. God's in control. These things are true. And they short circuit us from taking our human selves before God to have a relationship with him over who we are in our weakness and our frailty, to actually need him and cling to him for hope and peace, etc., in these difficult places, versus just pretend or minimize like things are okay.
Well, it denies our humanity of being our authentic selves. And if we can't be our authentic selves with God, then who can we be our authentic selves with? So that's the whole span of all of our emotions, not just the emotions that we feel we're allowed to have, but it's all of them. It's anger, it's lust, it's fear, it's sorrow, it's all of that. All of that is to be human.
So I think where we're getting to in conversation is we're brushing up against this idea of the stigma of mental emotional health issues in the church. And the beauty of the gospel is that we get to be honest with our weakness, our brokenness, our frailties, our sin, our immorality, the things that are all bad and wrong with us, including the ways that we cope negatively, that impact our mental and emotional well-being, pornography, all of these things, that because of Christ's forgiveness, we get to be honest with our weakness, our vulnerabilities. And so we as a church need to get more comfortable acknowledging how we struggle with our mental emotional health, because that's a part of our humanity. And if we can't name these weaknesses and these sins, then we don't need Jesus anymore. And so at the church is the place where we should be able to be the most genuinely free. We talk about freedom in Christ. Well, what is this freedom? This freedom is to be able to say, I'm messed up, I'm wrong, I'm broken, I'm struggling with anxiety and depression. I can't pull myself off the bathroom floor because I'm crying, I'm upset. We get to be free and honest with that reality of our brokenness and sin.
I love it. Yeah, there's that freedom. That's beautiful transparency before God, and to be known, and to not be living in shame, but to be known and be loved even in the midst of our brokenness. It's beautiful gospel. As we talk about the church's relationship with mental health and mental health professionals, I think of stigma, and I think of stigma with medication. And so I just want to talk about that for a little bit. What is it? Listen, in culture right now, gut health is a big deal. Like everyone's taking all these different, I'm being, my wife's got me taking all these different probiotics I'm supposed to be taking for my gut health, and I'm going to be a whole new man in like 3 months apparently. But gut health, we at least acknowledge that is making a difference. There's stuff going on in our gut that impacts the rest of us. But when it comes to our brain and our brain chemistry, it's like that's off the table. It feels like we can't touch that. And so let's talk a little bit about that. What's the stigma? Why is there a stigma? What should we really think about medication? What's your opinion?
Yeah, it's as if we have our brain and then everything else. It's all connected. So, and it all works in conjunction with one another. And as I said, if our mental health is not where it needs to be, our physical health also is not going to be where it needs to be. When we talk about psychiatric medications or prescription medications, then I always like to bring in self-medication. So we use other substances to calm down our feelings, whether it's coffee or alcohol,
Chocolate.
or, excuse me?
Chocolate.
That's a big one. Caffeine. These are substances. These are substances that are no different than other substances or other prescriptions that are prescribed by your doctor. So in terms of, I think there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear, as we've talked about, being in control. And we always think that we have complete control, and as though depression, anxiety, psychosis, bipolar, these issues are moral failures. So if we then have to go to therapy, go see a psychiatrist, and then take medicine, oh my God, what's wrong with us? But we don't have that same level of judgment with someone that has diabetes. And with diabetes, we don't go first to medicine. We want to look at diet, we want to look at exercise, we want to learn family history, if there's any genetic issues, that we look at all of that stuff. And then once we look at all that stuff, then we determine, is there a medication outcome that can help. So I mean, that's how I look at it. You know, when I was in medical school, one of the things, and I don't know that it flies as much, but one of the things that we used to talk about is, you know, if you had high blood pressure, you know, and your doctor tells you these are the things you need to do, lose weight, watch your diet, and then after these things don't work, then let's consider medication. But really the best thing to do is all of them. So that's kind of how my practice is. Very rarely in my practice do I have patients that are just on medicine without therapy. I won't force it, of course, but usually patients come to me being referred by therapy. And we know that the best outcomes are with patients that are on medicine along with therapy. Not everyone that's in therapy needs to be on medication. So, you know, I think it's all part of that stigma, and it's all part of the fear of being perceived as crazy or there's something wrong with you. It's your personal business. You know, no one needs to know what's in my medication cabinet, my medicine cabinet. But at the same time, we're also preventing ourselves from being our best selves by just knocking it out or saying no to it. Really, I think asking questions, knowing what this is, what it does to my brain chemistry. I think people are also afraid that it's somehow going to change them, particularly with kids. I get that a lot. I don't want my kid to be a zombie. You know, I've heard other things about other people getting addicted, all that kind of thing. And those are valid and great questions that I'm glad when my patients do ask me those questions. And never be afraid to ask your doctor questions. Ask as many as you can until you get the answer that you're comfortable with. But knowing what is happening to the brain. So in terms of depression and anxiety, that is located, those emotions are located in the front of our brain, the frontal lobe of our brain. It's also the executive functioning. So this is what helps us think, react. Our emotions are there. And the brain is sort of like hardwiring. Something sort of gets tripped a little bit off. And if it's a little bit off or not in tune, and that could be due to all sorts of reasons. It could be a genetic reason. It could be certain stressors and factors in our life that pushes to the point where it's just too much. Right now in the pandemic, we're seeing a lot of that. I'm seeing a lot of young people that are having psychotic breaks. There's a kind of an age range where we see that. Well, I'm actually seeing more now in the pandemic because we're under catastrophic stress is what we're under right now. So yeah, I think it's the stigma, not really understanding how neurochemicals work, how brain biology works, that it's not just smoke and mirrors, but there's real science behind it. And whatever you don't understand, it's complicated, but you know, it's not complicated enough to be able to explain to anyone that wants to know.
I think if you go to therapy for say a month or two and you're not, you know, feeling better to some extent, like you're not, your brain is not responding to the process of talk therapy, then it's worth taking a look at medication. And I've used the imagery of monkey bars to kind of maybe explain why medication can be a good idea. If you're trying to get across the monkey bars, but you can't jump up and get onto the first bar to get across, the medicine can kind of act as a booster and to help you be able to engage the process of talk therapy enough to get across the monkey bars. I found that's helpful to some clients, and I, again, firm believer in the role of medication with therapy. I've used medication before, and I'm so thankful that I did along with therapy. And the only question I asked myself after was, why did I wait so long?
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's just a wild thing that there's such a stigma surrounding this with our mental health. But as someone who's had cancer, you know, if my cancer comes back and I go and have, you know, chemotherapy or any kind of medication to address cancer, there's not a stigma with that. Of course, I'm going to pray. Of course, I'm going to have other people lay hands on me and pray over me. You know, maybe there's that fear that people don't want to admit what they're really going through with other sisters and brothers in Christ to actually receive that kind of prayer. But it's always prayer, you know, and like it's not either or. And that's true within my physical body, which is my mental health is part of my physical body. But for whatever reason, this area is like off limits, but everything else is kind of free game. And so I think it is important to address that and to say, like, let's think this through. Let's process this more. Let's learn more about this. Are there things that we're assuming that aren't real. Let's ask a lot of questions, like Cassandra was saying, and there is that unity. I appreciate that monkey bar analogy of like, hey, just get you up a little bit so that you can actually engage. It's not the end all be all. It's not the magic pill, but it's going to get you just a little bit to where you can actually move forward in the healing process. Well,
the point you make, Mike, about it not being the magic pill, I just want to emphasize that it still requires work. There isn't anything that you can take and then the next day it's all gone. You still have to work through whatever the issues are, whatever the trauma is, whatever the antecedents are to it. But medicine definitely can help, and it really isn't anything to be ashamed of, and it can save lives. That's one thing. We've spent a lot of time talking about anxiety. We spent some talking about depression, but depression kills. Some people become so distraught and so upset that they feel as though they can't go on anymore. They don't feel like they can talk about it for all the same reasons that we've talked about. And the only thing that they feel left that they can do is end it. So if medicine is one thing, along with therapy, pastoral counseling, spiritual guidance, I think all of these things are part of our toolkit. It's not one without the other, as you've mentioned. It's all of it together that can really take someone out of a really, really hard place.
Well, if the listeners have been through this conversation and they themselves recognize that they need help, what would you recommend that they do?
I'd say,
go ahead, Mary.
I'd just say reach out to, honestly, the first person usually my clients reach out is they call the church. But Bel Air has a great, resource. Reach out to some kind of professional, whether it's go to your doctor, call the church to get some kind of professional evaluation, I would say. It can't hurt, especially in these times. Or talk to your friends and say, what do you think? And they know you the best in your family, and they can give you like, okay, this seems normal, or no, this is more going on then. But I would say the thing, kind of what Kelly was saying, usually people wait too long. Usually they should have done it. And I would just say, if we're around, let us be encouragers. I feel like most people were discouraged along the way from reaching out and getting some kind of help, whether it's calling the church, calling their doctor, calling a therapist, calling a lay Christian counselor, whatever the avenue, but somebody, even the first step might be calling a friend, to talk it through. But I hope this discussion, and, I think when I remember it was the first time that I was in church, Rick Warren held up his credit card and said, I just charged marital therapy to my credit card, and that's the best thing. Like, from the pulpit, he was basically saying, and I think that can help people know it's okay to reach out for help. Mm-hmm. There's 1-800-NEW-LIFE. I always give that number out to my Christian clients. They have a great referral list. We have so many resources in LA that we're lucky for Christians and secular clients that there's no one, even if cost is an issue, that can't, maybe it's that you hook them up with a Stevens minister at Bel Air. So, but make that call to some point person that can help you get to the person that you need. And I think as Christians around us, be mindful and looking and be encouragers of that. If we, instead of usually what I hear clients is saying, oh, people told me, that I'll just grow out of it, or it'll pass, or the Lord will take care of it, or, you don't, if you seek help, you're not really relying on God. You can't take medication because that means all these things. So I think if we're doing the opposite of, if you feel like something's not right, I would say listen to that and reach out. Mm-hmm. the worst thing is that you get confirmation that, you know what, this is a normal process and it's not clinical and you're okay. But I would say more people do the opposite. So I guess that would be my suggestion. I don't know if you guys have other.
Yeah, I would just add, ideally, and this isn't always possible when you get referrals, to get a couple referrals for a therapist and give each of them a call, see if you can have 10 or 15 minutes on the phone and discern a best fit. You know, not every therapist is the right and best fit for every person. And the more you can kind of find somebody that you think you'll work well with, that can really benefit you.
Absolutely.
That's good. Yeah, we have, you mentioned Bel Air, we have a referral list, and we always give out 3 different referrals, and we don't, you know, it's like call these 3 and see what fits for you. But so again, that's a resource to you all if you are on this Zoom and you are in need of psychologists, or you know, you want that referral, just reach out to the church and we'd be happy to make a recommendation for you. And we also have ways in which, if you can't afford therapy, we have some ways in which we might be able to partner with you to get you into at least 6 sessions. 6 sessions might not do the whole thing, but it will get you started. And so we have a way to be able to match some of those expenses so that you can actually get in and see somebody and get the help that you need. You know, I think that especially with these 3 women and those that are on our referral list, Jesus talks a lot about mourning with those who mourn, and carrying one another's burdens, and confessing to one another, and all these one another's in Scripture. And to think of a therapist as someone who is a sister or brother in Christ, who's also walking with you and very much practicing the one another's that Christ has commanded us to do, that this is part of what it means. It's not that we're not trusting God, we're actually practicing the thing that Jesus told us to do. And so this is a great opportunity. So if I am on this Zoom and I have a loved one who is suffering, what would you say are some of the qualities, the best characteristics that I can possess as I seek to help them? What are some of the best characteristics?
I would say curiosity and empathy are 2 of the most, and not trying to fix it or dismiss, but definitely be curious, ask questions, explore, be compassionate. I think Jesus showed us that, like, and move towards the suffering, not away. I think Jesus always moved toward the sick and suffering. He didn't move away, or, well, let's let them figure it out, or, you know, they'll come to me when, you know, they really want to talk or something. It's like, no, take the initiative, reach out.
Yeah, I like the acronym PLACE, and it has a lot of overlap with what Mary has shared. Thinking of engaging them with playfulness, love, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. And using the phrase, tell me more, you know, seeking to understand them before what your perspectives, to not have your perspective be understood first, but to understand them. Being self-aware of the fears that you carry, so you're not entering into conversation with them with your anxieties driving the conversation.
It's good. Place. It's good.
Yep.
Cassandra, any others that come to mind for you?
Yeah, those were all excellent. I would echo all of them. You know, I think empathy is really high up there, as well as just, you know, actively listening. And they're not passively listening, but just really being there with someone and letting them know that no matter what, I'm here. I'm just here to listen. I'm not here to judge. I'm not here to fix, but I'm here to listen.
So good. You know, it reminds me of the Apostle Paul when he writes the 2nd letter to the church in Corinth. He says, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all of our afflictions, so that we might be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. In Hebrews, I just love this about Jesus. Since then, we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast to our confession. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in all things as we are, yet without sin. Let us therefore draw near with confidence to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and may find grace to help in time of need. Love that. As I've been reflecting on this in Luke, did you know that the gospel? Oh, did you want to say something? I'm sorry. Mary, did you want to say something?
No. I was just listening. I just said, oh, that was good.
Did you know that in the Gospel of Luke, or Luke Acts, the author Luke was, the disciple, that he was most likely, that he was also a doctor, which I think is cool. But he recorded Jesus walking around therapeuting people. Therapeuting people. This is a Greek word, therapeuo, I guess is how you would probably say it. And it's often translated as to heal or to cure. And it's found 43 times in the New Testament. Therapy is recorded 43 times in the New Testament. And much of it's been attributed to Jesus's work, which I bring this up because I really want to encourage you. What you're doing, the three of you, what you're doing, and the other therapists that are in our midst, you're participating with Christ in his therapy work. The church needs to partner hand in glove with doctors like you. So I'm just so grateful. I'm so grateful that you stepped forward and said, yes, I'd like to participate in this forum. And I believe your words of wisdom, your experience, your love for people, your love for God has just made this conversation beautiful. And I think it's going to help a lot of people. So thank you for that. If you're on this Zoom and you would like to have further resources, we've already mentioned that Bel Air Church has some further resources. You can go to belair.org and click on either caring or get help. If you go to the caring section, you'll go to our caring ministries page and you'll learn of deacons and Stevens ministers and Celebrate Recovery. You can go to our resource page. It's resources.belair.org /health. And on that resource page, you're going to find a 6-week devotional regarding Christ's therapeuo work and his sozo work, which is his saving work. You'll find some reading resources that we'd recommend, some helpful articles, and some helpful videos. So I'd encourage you to go there. And again, if you need further assistance or would like to have a Bel Air Church vetted therapist, you can email our Caring Ministries department at caring@belairpress.org. And I'd like to invite you to join us again next month. We'll be discussing the challenges of people experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles. And so we invite you to participate in that conversation as well. Again, if you like what you heard tonight, it's going to be on our website in the coming weeks. It's going to be on YouTube, so you can always share it and watch it again. Again, thank you, Dr. Cassandra Harewood. Thank you, Dr. Mary Mannix. Thank you, Dr. Kelly Haer.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been excellent.
Praise God. Well, again, thanks to our producers group for helping coordinate tonight's meeting. And if you want to stick around, we're going to go into some breakout groups. And if you want to have some further conversation with sisters and brothers in Christ around what you heard tonight, if there's something that stood out, don't feel any pressure. You don't have to. This is the end of our time together, but you can go into a breakout room and have further conversation for the next 20 minutes. So if that's of interest to you, stick around and we'll move you into a room. If not, have a blessed evening. And good to be with you. And we'll see you again next month. God bless you guys. Thanks so much.
God bless you.
Good night.
Great to be with you all.
Wonderful.
Take care.
Thank you.